I woke up to the sound of knuckles tapping against my car window at 3 in the morning, my neck stiff from sleeping curled up in the driver's seat of my Honda Civic. Through the fogged glass, I could make out the worried face of my grandfather Samuel, his silver hair catching the orange glow from the streetlight above. He was wearing his old navy blue bathrobe and slippers, standing in the empty parking lot behind Murphy's Diner, where I had been hiding my car for the past week. His voice was muffled but clear as he asked the question that made my stomach drop like a stone. "The house I gave you, didn't you like it?" I rolled down the window trying to think of anything to say that wouldn't break his heart, because the truth was something I could never tell him. The cold November air hit my face as I stepped out of the car, my joints aching from another night spent sleeping in cramped quarters. Samuel's eyes searched mine, looking for answers I couldn't give him. His weathered hands trembled slightly, whether from the cold or confusion, I couldn't tell. "Cobb, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice carrying that gentle tone he had used when I was a kid and had scraped my knee or broken something valuable. "You should be at home in your bed in that beautiful house." I scrambled for words, my breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Grandpa, I'm sorry. There's been some work being done on the house, renovations. The contractors needed me out for a few days while they finish up the plumbing." It was a terrible lie, and I could see doubt flickering in his pale blue eyes. Samuel had always been sharp, even at 82. He had built his own construction company from nothing back in the 1960s and could spot a poorly constructed story just as easily as a badly framed wall. "Renovations. You didn't mention any renovations when we had lunch last month," he said, pulling his bathrobe tighter around his thin frame. "And why didn't you just come stay with me? You know I have that extra bedroom upstairs." The guilt twisted in my chest, like a knife. For the past 6 months, I'd been living out of my car, showering at the 24-hour fitness center on Maple Street, eating dollar menu hamburgers and gas station sandwiches, moving from parking lot to parking lot each night to avoid being spotted by police or security guards. The house Samuel thought he had given me, the 2-story colonial, with the wraparound porch and the big oak tree in the front yard, belonged to someone else now. Someone who had stolen it right out from under me through forged documents and legal manipulation that I was too ashamed and too broke to fight. "I didn't want to bother you," I said, which was at least partially true. Samuel had worked his entire life to build something for his family, and the last thing I wanted was for him to know that his generosity had been hijacked by greed and deception. "Bother me, Cobb? You're my grandson. You could never bother me." He reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder, and I could feel the warmth of his touch through my thin jacket. "Come on, let's go check on this renovation work. I want to see what they're doing to my old house." My blood turned to ice water. "Grandpa, it's 3 in the morning. The contractors won't be there now." "Then we can see the progress they made today," he said with determination. "I've been wanting to drive by anyway. That house holds a lot of memories for me and your grandmother. We lived there for 37 years, you know." I knew I couldn't refuse without raising more suspicions, so I climbed into the passenger seat of his old Ford pickup truck, the same vehicle he had driven to every construction site for decades. The vinyl seats were cracked and patched with duct tape, but the engine still purred like it was brand new. As we drove through the empty streets, Samuel talked excitedly about his plans for family gatherings. "I was thinking we could have Thanksgiving dinner there this year," he said, his eyes bright with anticipation. "The dining room table can seat 10 people comfortably. We could invite Martha and her kids, maybe even get your cousin Derek to come. It would be like the old days when your grandmother was still with us." Each word felt like a physical blow. I stared out the window at the dark houses we passed, their windows black and lifeless, much like my hopes for a normal future. How could I explain to this kind, generous man that his other grandson had manipulated legal documents to steal the inheritance meant for me? How could I tell him that Derek, the golden boy, who had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern and now worked as a financial advisor, had used his connections and education to commit fraud against his own family. When we turned onto Elm Street, I could see the house in the distance. Even in the darkness, it looked exactly as I remembered from my childhood visits, stately and welcoming, with its white columns and black shutters. But as we got closer, my worst fears were confirmed. Derek's metallic blue BMW was parked in the driveway, and warm yellow light glowed from the living room windows. Samuel pulled up to the curb and turned off the engine. "Well, that's strange. Why would the contractors be working this late? And whose car is that?" Before I could answer, the front door opened, and Derek emerged wearing a burgundy bathrobe and leather slippers. His dark hair was perfectly styled, even at 3 in the morning, and his smile was as smooth and practiced as always. He walked down the front steps with the confidence of someone who belonged there, someone who owned the place. "Uncle Samuel." "What a surprise," Derek called out, approaching the truck with his arms spread wide in a gesture of welcome. "And Cobb, what brings you by so late?" Samuel climbed out of the truck, looking confused, but pleased to see Derek. "I found Cobb sleeping in his car behind Murphy's Diner. He said there were renovations happening, but I wanted to see the progress." Derek's eyes met mine for just a split second, and I saw something cold and calculating flash across his face before the warm smile returned. "Oh, that's right. I'm actually house-sitting while Cobb is traveling for work. Big client presentation in Chicago, very important for his career. I offered to stay here and keep an eye on the renovation crew." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly that even I almost believed it. Samuel's confusion cleared, replaced by pride and excitement. "Chicago Cobb, you didn't tell me about any business trip. That's wonderful news. What kind of presentation?" I stood there like a deer in headlights, unable to speak, while Derek continued weaving his web of deception. "He's been working on this project for months, Uncle Samuel. Very hush-hush, you know how these corporate deals are. I told him I'd take care of everything here while he's gone." Derek shot me a look that was equal parts warning and threat, his eyes narrowing just enough to remind me that he held all the cards in this game. If I said anything now, if I exposed his lies, what would happen to Samuel? The old man's heart wasn't strong anymore, and the shock of learning that his family had been torn apart by greed and betrayal might be more than he could handle. "Well, let's go inside and see these renovations," Samuel said, heading toward the front door with renewed energy. Derek led us into the house with the practiced ease of someone who had been living there for months. As we stepped into the entryway, I was shocked by how much had changed since I had last seen the place. What used to be Samuel's modest, comfortable furniture had been replaced with expensive leather couches, a massive flat-screen television mounted on the wall, and modern art pieces that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. "Derek, this looks incredible," Samuel exclaimed, running his fingers along the polished surface of a glass coffee table. "Cobb, you've really outdone yourself with these upgrades." My cousin beamed with false modesty. "Well, I can't take all the credit. Cobb had very specific ideas about what he wanted. I just helped coordinate with the contractors and designers while he's been so busy with work." We moved into the kitchen where Derek had installed granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a wine refrigerator that hummed quietly in the corner. He busied himself making coffee in an expensive espresso machine, playing the perfect host while continuing to spin his elaborate fiction. "Would you like some coffee, Uncle Samuel? I just got this blend from a little roastery in Vermont. Cobb discovered it during one of his business trips." Derek's attention to detail was masterful. Every lie was layered with just enough specificity to sound believable. Samuel settled into one of the high-backed kitchen chairs, looking around with obvious delight. "I never imagined this old place could look so modern. Your grandmother would have loved these changes, especially this kitchen. She always complained about those old countertops. The renovation crew should be back tomorrow morning." Derek continued pouring steaming coffee into 3 ceramic mugs. "They're working on the upstairs bathrooms next. Cobb wanted everything to be perfect before he starts entertaining clients here." I watched this performance with growing horror and admiration. Derek had thought of everything. He had created an entire alternate reality where I was a successful businessman who traveled frequently for work, explaining both my absence and my supposed ability to afford such expensive renovations. Meanwhile, the truth was that I had been unemployed for 8 months, ever since the marketing firm where I worked had downsized and eliminated my position. "When will you be back from Chicago, Cobb?" Samuel asked, turning to me with expectant eyes. Before I could stumble through another lie, Derek answered for me. His schedule is pretty packed for the next few weeks. 3 different presentations plus some follow-up meetings. Big opportunities, though. This could really set him up financially for the future. Samuel nodded approvingly. "That's my grandson. I always knew you had it in you to succeed. Your parents would be so proud." The mention of my parents, who had died in a car accident when I was 15, hit me like a physical blow. Samuel had taken me in after their death, raising me with the same love and care he would have given his own son. Now I was repaying that kindness by participating in a lie that allowed his other grandson to steal from him. Derek pulled out his phone and showed Samuel some photos. "These are from last week's progress. The contractors installed new hardwood floors in the bedrooms, and they're refinishing the staircase banister." I craned my neck to look at the photos, realizing that Derek had been documenting every change he made to the house, creating evidence to support his story. The level of planning involved was staggering. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a calculated long-term scheme. "I've been keeping all the family updated on Cobb's success," Derek said, refilling Samuel's coffee cup. "Aunt Martha was so excited to hear about his promotion. I told her about the business trips, so she understands why he hasn't been able to visit lately." My stomach dropped. Martha was Samuel's younger sister, a retired schoolteacher who lived about 2 hours away in Springfield. She had always been close to our family, sending birthday cards and Christmas gifts, calling Samuel every Sunday without fail. If Derek had been intercepting communication between them, the scope of his deception was even larger than I had imagined. "Martha knows about the promotion?" Samuel asked, looking pleased. "I haven't talked to her in a few weeks. She must be traveling again. That woman never could sit still for long." Derek nodded smoothly. "She's on one of her European tours, I think. She mentioned something about visiting museums in France. Said she'd call when she got back." The lie was so casual, so effortlessly delivered, that I wondered how many other relatives Derek had isolated from Samuel using similar stories. How many people thought they were being considerate by giving me space for my supposedly busy career, when in reality I was sleeping in parking lots and scraping together enough money for fast food meals. "I should probably let you get some rest, Uncle Samuel," Derek said, glancing at his expensive watch. "It's getting late, and I know you like to be up early for your morning walks." Samuel stood up, still looking around the kitchen with obvious pride. "This really is beautiful work, Cobb. When you get back from your trip, we'll have to plan that Thanksgiving dinner I mentioned. This kitchen would be perfect for cooking a big family meal." Derek's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Actually, Uncle Samuel, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Cobb mentioned that he might need to make some changes to his living situation soon. The success of his business has opened up some new opportunities, maybe a corporate apartment closer to his office, or even a transfer to the company's West Coast division." I stared at Derek in shock. He was already planning the next phase of his scheme, preparing Samuel for the possibility that I might disappear from the picture entirely. The house would then be his, permanently, with no awkward questions about when the rightful owner might return. Samuel's face fell slightly. "Oh. Well, I suppose success does come with sacrifices. But this house has been in our family for so long. It would be a shame to see it go to strangers. Of course, if Cobb does decide to relocate, I'd be happy to keep the house in the family." Derek offered with practiced reluctance. "I could buy it from him at fair market value, make sure it stays with people who understand its sentimental importance." The audacity of the suggestion left me speechless. Derek wasn't just stealing the house. He was positioning himself as the savior who would preserve it for the family, the responsible grandson who would step in when his cousin's career demanded sacrifice. Samuel considered this proposal seriously. "That's very thoughtful of you, Derek. Family should stick together, especially when it comes to important decisions like this." "Absolutely," Derek agreed. "Family comes first always. That's why I've been so happy to help Cobb during this busy time in his career. We look out for each other." As we prepared to leave, Derek walked us to the door with the same gracious hospitality he had shown all evening. But as Samuel headed toward the truck, Derek grabbed my arm and pulled me close enough to whisper in my ear. "Keep your mouth shut and everything will be fine," he said, his voice low and threatening. "But if you even think about telling him the truth, I'll make sure he finds out about your gambling problem. How do you think he'll feel when he learns his generous gift went to pay off your debts to some very dangerous people?" I jerked away from him, confused and angry. "What gambling problem? I've never gambled in my life." Derek's smile was cold and predatory. "That's not what the evidence will show. Credit card statements from online poker sites, withdrawal records from ATMs at casinos, text messages from loan sharks demanding payment. It's amazing what you can create with the right software and a little creativity." The threat was clear. If I exposed his theft, he would destroy my reputation with fabricated evidence of gambling addiction, making it look like I had squandered Samuel's gift and was now trying to blame him for my own failures. Who would believe the unemployed grandson sleeping in his car over the successful financial advisor with an impeccable reputation? "Cobb, are you coming?" Samuel called from the truck. I walked away from Derek without another word, my mind racing with the implications of what I had just learned. This wasn't just about stealing a house anymore. Derek had been systematically isolating Samuel from his family, positioning himself as the primary caretaker and heir apparent. And now he had made it clear that he was prepared to destroy anyone who stood in his way. Over the next 3 days, I couldn't stop thinking about Derek's casual mention of Aunt Martha's supposed trip to France. Something about it felt wrong, too convenient, too perfectly timed to explain her absence from Samuel's life. Martha was 76 years old and had arthritis in both knees. The idea of her taking a European vacation, especially during November, seemed completely out of character. I decided to do some investigating. From my car parked outside the public library, I used their free internet to search for Martha's contact information. When I called her house in Springfield, she answered on the second ring, sounding surprised and delighted to hear from me. "Hey, Cobb, what a wonderful surprise. I was just thinking about you and your grandfather. How are you doing, sweetheart?" "I'm doing well, Aunt Martha. How was your trip to France?" There was a long pause. "Trip to France? Honey, I haven't been anywhere. I've been right here in Springfield dealing with a water leak in my basement for the past month. Where did you get the idea that I was traveling?" My suspicions were confirmed. Derek had been lying to Samuel about Martha's whereabouts, just as he had been lying about everything else. I explained that Samuel thought she was on a European tour, and Martha's voice grew concerned. "That's very strange, Cobb. I've been trying to call Samuel for weeks, but I keep getting his voicemail. I left several messages asking him to call me back, but he never does. I was starting to worry that something had happened to him." "What do you mean you've been trying to call him?" "I call every Sunday just like I have for the past 10 years since Margaret passed away. But lately, either his phone goes straight to voicemail, or someone else answers and tells me he's napping or busy with something. A young man with a very polite voice. He always says Samuel will call me back, but he never does. Derek." It had to be Derek intercepting Martha's calls and preventing Samuel from speaking with her. But why would he go to such lengths to isolate Samuel from his family? Aunt Martha, has Samuel mentioned anything about updating his will recently? Funny you should ask. About 3 months ago, he called and said he was making some changes to his estate planning. He wanted to make sure both you and Derek were taken care of, but he also mentioned something about setting up a trust to help pay for his medical care as he gets older. He seemed worried about becoming a burden on the family. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Derek wasn't just stealing the house. He was positioning himself to control Samuel's entire estate. By isolating the old man from other family members and making himself indispensable, he was setting up a situation where he would inherit everything. I spent the next day tracking down other relatives, calling cousins and family friends I hadn't spoken to in months. The pattern was always the same. Derek had been in contact with everyone, explaining my busy travel schedule, my important business deals, my inability to maintain regular communication. He had created a network of lies that explained away my absence while positioning himself as the primary family contact and caretaker. My cousin Patricia, who lived in Denver, told me that Derek had called her just 2 weeks earlier. He said you were doing so well with your career, but that success was keeping you incredibly busy. He mentioned that you might be relocating for work, so you probably wouldn't be able to make it to Christmas dinner this year. I was disappointed, but I understood. Business opportunities like that don't come around often. Even more disturbing, Derek had been collecting information about other family members and using it to explain their absence from Samuel's life. He told Samuel that Patricia was dealing with her husband's health problems and couldn't travel. He claimed that our cousin Michael was going through a difficult divorce and needed space to work through his personal issues. Each story was plausible enough to explain why these relatives weren't calling or visiting, while also making Derek appear compassionate and understanding. The next piece of the puzzle came when I visited the law office where Samuel's inheritance paperwork had been processed. The receptionist remembered me from 6 months ago when Derek had brought me in to supposedly sign the transfer documents for the house. "Oh yes, Mr. Thompson," she said, pulling my file from a cabinet. "I remember that day. You seemed very nervous about declining the inheritance. It's unusual for someone to turn down such a generous gift, but your cousin explained that you were having some financial difficulties." I stared at her in confusion. Declining the inheritance, I never declined anything. I was supposed to receive the house. The receptionist's smile faltered. "But you signed the paperwork right here saying that you couldn't accept the property due to outstanding debts. Your cousin Derek was very concerned about your situation. He said the house would be better off staying in the family until you could get back on your feet financially." She showed me the documents and my blood ran cold. There was my signature at the bottom of a legal form stating that I was voluntarily declining the inheritance due to financial instability and requesting that the property be transferred to Derek as the alternate beneficiary. The signature looked exactly like mine, but I had never seen this document before in my life. "Can I speak with the lawyer who handled this case? Mr. Hendricks is in court this morning, but he should be back after lunch. Would you like to schedule an appointment?" I waited in the parking lot for 3 hours until a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit arrived at the office. When I introduced myself, his expression grew uncomfortable. "Mr. Thompson, this is highly irregular. The case was closed months ago, and all the paperwork was properly filed. I need to ask you directly, did you verify my signature on those documents?" Mr. Hendricks shifted nervously, loosening his tie. "Your cousin Derek assured me that everything was in order. He said you were going through some personal difficulties and preferred to handle the transfer quietly, without a lot of family drama. Did you check the signature against any official documents? Did you require notarization or witnesses?" Well, Derek is a respected financial professional, and he vouched for the authenticity of your decision. Given the family circumstances, we felt it was appropriate to expedite the process. I realized that Mr. Hendricks had cut corners because of his relationship with Derek. Later, I would discover that they had been fraternity brothers at Northwestern, and Derek had brought him several wealthy clients over the years. The lawyer had trusted his friend without doing proper due diligence, making himself complicit in the fraud. "Mr. Hendricks, I need you to understand something very clearly. I never signed those documents and I never declined the inheritance. My cousin forged my signature and stole my grandfather's house through fraudulent paperwork." The lawyer's face went white. "That's a very serious accusation, Mr. Thompson. If what you're saying is true, we're talking about criminal fraud and forgery. It's absolutely true, and I'm going to need your help to prove it." But the most shocking discovery came when I accessed Samuel's banking information. Martha had mentioned that she had been sending monthly checks to help with Samuel's medical expenses, something she had done quietly for the past year, without telling anyone else in the family. When I asked Samuel about these payments, he had no idea what I was talking about. "Monthly checks from Martha, I haven't received anything like that, Cobb. Are you sure she's been sending them?" I helped Samuel contact his bank and request copies of all deposits and withdrawals from the past year. When the statements arrived, we found that Martha's checks had indeed been deposited into Samuel's account every month, but they had been immediately transferred to a separate account that Samuel had never opened. The account had been set up using Samuel's Social Security number and personal information, but it was managed by someone who had power of attorney privileges. Derek had been intercepting Martha's financial assistance and diverting it to an account that he controlled, stealing money that was intended to help pay for Samuel's prescription medications and doctor visits. Even worse, Derek had been slowly draining Samuel's primary savings account using the same power of attorney documents. Small amounts at first, just a few $100s every month, but gradually increasing as he became more confident in his scheme. Over the past 6 months, nearly $20,000 had been transferred out of Samuel's account into Derek's control. When I showed Samuel the bank statements, his hands shook as he held the papers. "I don't understand, Cobb. I signed those power of attorney documents because Derek said they were for emergency medical decisions, in case I ever ended up in the hospital and couldn't make decisions for myself. I never gave him permission to access my bank accounts." The full scope of Derek's betrayal was finally becoming clear. He had manipulated Samuel into signing legal documents under false pretenses, then used those documents to steal money that was meant to support the old man's medical care. He had forged my signature to steal my inheritance, then created an elaborate fiction to explain my absence, while isolating Samuel from other family members who might have questioned what was happening. But Derek wasn't finished yet. The final piece of his plan was already in motion, and it was more devastating than anything I had discovered so far. Living in my car had become a routine of survival and stealth. Each morning, I would drive to the YMCA on Oak Street to shower and shave, using the guest pass that allowed me 3 visits per month. I kept my work clothes pressed and hanging in the back seat, maintaining the appearance of someone who had their life together, even as I struggled to find enough money for gas and food. During the day, while Derek was at his office managing other people's investments, I would park across the street from Samuel's house and watch for patterns. I started noticing things that had seemed innocent before, but now took on sinister meaning. Derek's mail was being delivered to the house along with Samuel's. He had systematically redirected most of Samuel's correspondence to ensure that he would be the first to see any important documents, medical bills, or financial statements. I also observed Derek's interactions with the neighbors. Mrs. Chen, who lived next door, would wave and chat with him when he was working in the yard or bringing in groceries. To her, Derek appeared to be a devoted grandson, helping his elderly grandfather maintain the property. She had no idea that Samuel was living alone in a small apartment across town, while Derek enjoyed the comfort of a house that didn't belong to him. One afternoon, I followed Derek to a real estate office downtown. Through the window, I could see him having an animated conversation with a well-dressed woman who kept pulling out photographs and paperwork. When they shook hands and Derek left, I waited a few minutes before going inside. "Excuse me," I said to the real estate agent. "I think the gentleman who just left was asking about a property on Elm Street. I'm interested in houses in that neighborhood." The agent's eyes lit up with the possibility of another sale. "Oh yes, Mr. Derek Thompson. Such a sweet man taking care of his grandfather's estate planning. The property is a beautiful colonial, very well maintained. It should be on the market within the next month." My heart sank. Derek was already moving forward with plans to sell Samuel's house, probably intending to convince the old man that maintaining the property was becoming too difficult and expensive. Once the house was sold, Derek would control the proceeds. while Samuel would be left with nothing but the small apartment he was renting. "Has the property been appraised yet?" I asked. Yes, it came in at $450,000. Quite a nice investment for the family. Mr. Derek mentioned that his grandfather is considering moving to a retirement community, so selling the house would help pay for assisted living expenses. $450,000. Derek stood to make nearly $500,000 by selling a house he had stolen through forged documents, and he was planning to use Samuel's supposed need for assisted living as justification for the sale. I spent the next week gathering evidence and documenting everything I had learned. I photographed the forged signature on the inheritance documents and compared it to authentic samples of my handwriting. I compiled bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers from Samuel's account. I recorded phone conversations with family members who had been deceived by Derek's lies about my supposed business success. The hardest part was listening to Samuel talk about Derek with such pride and affection. "He's been such a help to me, Cobb. Stopping by to check on me, handling my paperwork, making sure I'm eating properly. I don't know what I would do without him." Each word was like a knife in my chest because I knew that Derek's apparent devotion was nothing more than a calculated performance designed to maintain control over Samuel's assets. The old man was living in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment, eating canned soup for dinner and skipping his blood pressure medication because he thought he couldn't afford it, while Derek was living in luxury, using stolen money. I finally decided to consult with an attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases. Janet Morrison had been practicing law for 25 years and had seen every type of financial exploitation imaginable. When I explained the situation, she listened carefully and took detailed notes. "This is a textbook case of elder financial abuse," she said, reviewing the documents I had brought. The forged signatures, the misuse of power of attorney, the isolation from family members, the unauthorized access to bank accounts. Your cousin has committed multiple felonies. "What can we do to stop him?" "We need to build a comprehensive case that will hold up in court. Financial crimes can be difficult to prosecute because they often involve complex paper trails and questions of intent. We need to prove not just that money was stolen, but that it was stolen deliberately and systematically." Attorney Morrison helped me understand the legal process and the types of evidence we would need. We would have to prove that Derek's power of attorney privileges had been obtained under false pretenses that my signature on the inheritance documents had been forged, and that he had deliberately isolated Samuel from other family members as part of a broader scheme to control his assets. "The good news is that your cousin has been very thorough in documenting his activities," she said. "Criminals often create evidence against themselves when they try to appear legitimate. Those real estate photos, the bank transfer records, the pattern of intercepted communications, they all work in our favor. But building a legal case would take time, and I was worried about what Derek might do if he suspected that his scheme was being exposed. I had already noticed him pressuring Samuel to sign additional documents, claiming they were updates to his medical directives, but potentially giving Derek even more control over the old man's affairs. The breakthrough came when I reconnected with more distant relatives who had been receiving Derek's updates about my supposed business success. My second cousin Rachel, who lived in California, mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Derek called last month and said you might be moving to Los Angeles for a corporate position," she said. "He was asking about retirement communities out here, saying that your grandfather might want to be closer to family if you relocated. There are some very nice assisted living facilities in Orange County." Derek wasn't just planning to sell the house. He was laying the groundwork to move Samuel across the country completely, severing his connections to his longtime friends, neighbors, and community. Once Samuel was in an unfamiliar place, isolated from anyone who might question Derek's control over his affairs, the old man would be completely vulnerable. I realized that I was running out of time. Derek's plan was moving into its final phase, and once Samuel was convinced to move to California, it would be nearly impossible to prove what had really happened. The house would be sold, the money would disappear into Derek's accounts, and Samuel would spend his remaining years in an expensive care facility that Derek would control completely. That's when I made the decision to stop hiding and start fighting back. I couldn't protect Samuel by staying silent anymore. The time had come to expose Derek's lies and reclaim what had been stolen, no matter what threats he made about fabricated gambling debts or forged evidence. But I wouldn't be fighting alone. As I was about to discover, Samuel had been conducting his own investigation, and he was far more aware of Derek's deception than either of us had realized. I spent 3 sleepless nights in my car, parked behind different 24-hour diners and gas stations, planning my next move. Attorney Morrison had explained that we needed irrefutable evidence of Derek's crimes before we could involve law enforcement. Financial fraud cases often came down to he said versus he said arguments, and Derek's reputation as a successful financial advisor would carry weight with judges and juries. My first step was to arrange a surprise family gathering. I called every relative I could reach, explaining that I wanted to surprise Samuel with an early birthday celebration. What I didn't tell them was that I was also planning to expose Derek's web of lies by having everyone compare the different stories he had told them about why they hadn't been in contact with Samuel. Aunt Martha was the easiest to convince. She had been worried about Samuel for weeks and was eager for any excuse to see him. "I'll drive up Saturday morning," she said, "and I'm bringing that photo album of pictures from when you and Derek were little boys. Samuel always loved looking through those old family photos." My cousin Patricia agreed to fly in from Denver, saying she had been feeling guilty about not visiting more often. Derek made it sound like Samuel was doing so well and staying so busy that I didn't want to impose, but I've missed him. Even my uncle Robert, Samuel's youngest brother who lived in Michigan, agreed to make the trip. Derek told me that Samuel was thinking about selling the house and moving to a retirement community. I wanted to talk to him about that decision before he did something he might regret. By Friday evening, I had confirmed that 6 different family members would be arriving at Samuel's apartment Saturday afternoon, all carrying different pieces of Derek's elaborate deception. None of them knew about the others, and none of them knew that Derek had been systematically lying to keep them away from Samuel. But I was also planning something else, something that would force Derek to reveal the true extent of his scheme. I called Samuel and told him I was coming back from my business trip early and wanted to stop by the house Saturday morning to check on the renovation progress. "That's wonderful, Cobb," Samuel said, his voice bright with excitement. "Derek mentioned that the contractors finished the upstairs bathrooms yesterday. I've been eager to see how everything turned out." When I arrived at the house Saturday morning, Derek's BMW was in the driveway, along with a white van that belonged to a moving company. My pulse quickened as I realized that Derek was already beginning to empty the house, probably preparing to stage it for sale. I knocked on the front door, and Derek answered, wearing an expensive polo shirt and khakis, looking annoyed to see me. "Cobb, what are you doing here? I thought you weren't supposed to be back until next week." "The presentation went better than expected," I said, pushing past him into the entryway. "I wanted to see how the renovations were coming along." Inside, I could see cardboard boxes stacked in the living room filled with items that had belonged to Samuel and my grandmother. Family photos, vintage dishes, books that Samuel had collected over decades, all being packed away like unwanted clutter. "What's all this?" I asked, gesturing toward the boxes. Derek's smooth smile faltered for just a moment before returning to full strength. "Oh, this is just some of Uncle Samuel's old things. He asked me to help him declutter, said he was feeling overwhelmed by all the memories in the house. I'm having them move to a storage unit so he can decide what he really wants to keep." It was another lie expertly crafted and delivered with perfect sincerity. Derek had probably convinced Samuel that the items needed to be temporarily stored during the renovation work, never mentioning that he planned to sell the house and everything in it. "Where is Samuel now?" "He's at his apartment resting. All this activity has been exhausting for him. He's not as young as he used to be, you know." I walked through the house, noting how Derek had completely erased any trace of Samuel's presence. The family photos that used to line the mantelpiece were gone. The reading chair where Samuel used to sit every evening was nowhere to be found. Even the smell of the house was different, sterile and impersonal, instead of warm and lived in. "Derek, we need to talk," I said, turning to face him directly. "I know what you've been doing." His expression didn't change, but I could see calculation behind his eyes. "I'm not sure what you mean, Cobb. I've been helping Uncle Samuel manage his affairs while you've been traveling for work. I thought you'd be grateful for the assistance." "I've never been traveling for work. I've been unemployed for 8 months, living in my car, eating fast food because I can't afford anything else. And I never signed any documents declining my inheritance." Derek's smile finally disappeared completely. "That's a very serious accusation, cousin. Are you feeling all right? The stress of your career pressures might be affecting your judgment. I've talked to Aunt Martha. I've talked to Patricia and Robert and everyone else you've been lying to about my supposed business success. I know you forged my signature on those inheritance documents, and I know you've been stealing money from Samuel's bank accounts." For a long moment, Derek said nothing. Then his expression hardened into something cold and predatory, revealing the calculating person who had been hiding behind years of charm and false concern. "You can't prove anything," he said quietly. "And even if you could, who would believe you? The unemployed loser sleeping in his car, or the successful financial advisor who's been taking care of his elderly grandfather?" "We're about to find out," I said. "Because in about an hour this house is going to be full of family members who want to hear your explanation for why you've been lying to all of them." Derek's confident facade cracked completely. "What are you talking about?" "Martha, Patricia, Robert, Michael. Everyone you've been feeding different stories to explain why they haven't seen Samuel lately. They're all coming here this afternoon, and they're all going to want to know why their stories don't match up." Before Derek could respond, we heard a car door slam outside, followed by the sound of familiar voices. Through the front window, I could see Samuel getting out of a pickup truck, accompanied by a man I didn't recognize. "Looks like Samuel decided to come check on the renovation progress himself," I said. "Along with a friend." Derek moved towards the back door, clearly planning to escape before the confrontation could begin. But as he reached for the handle, we heard Samuel's voice calling from the front porch. "Derek, Cobb, I brought someone with me who's very interested in seeing how the renovation work is coming along." The front door opened, and Samuel walked in, followed by a tall, gray-haired man in his 60s, wearing a casual jacket and jeans. Samuel looked around at the packed boxes and moving equipment, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding, to something that might have been anger. "Well, Derek," Samuel said, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard before. "This is my neighbor, Detective Frank Morrison. He's retired from the police force, but he's still very good at spotting things that don't quite add up. Frank, I'd like you to meet my grandsons." Derek's face went white as the implications of Samuel's words sank in. The old man hadn't been as naive and trusting as everyone had assumed. He had been conducting his own investigation, working with someone who had the expertise to uncover the truth about Derek's elaborate scheme. "Detective Morrison has been helping me understand some discrepancies I noticed in my financial statements." Samuel continued, his eyes never leaving Derek's face. "Amazing how much you can learn when you know what questions to ask." Detective Morrison stepped forward with the calm confidence of someone who had spent 30 years interrogating suspects and gathering evidence. Despite being retired, he carried himself with the authority that came from decades of police work, and his sharp eyes missed nothing as he surveyed the packed boxes and moving equipment. "Mr. Derek Thompson," he said, pulling a small notebook from his jacket pocket. "I've been working with your grandfather for the past 3 weeks, helping him understand some irregularities in his financial accounts and family communications. Would you mind explaining why your grandfather's belongings are being packed up when he was under the impression that this house was still owned by your cousin Cobb?" Derek's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The smooth confidence that had carried him through months of deception had finally abandoned him, leaving him looking like what he really was, a cornered criminal who had been caught in the act. Samuel moved to one of the packed boxes and pulled out a framed photograph of my grandmother standing in the garden behind the house. "This picture has sat on my mantelpiece for 15 years, Derek. Why is it being loaded into a moving truck?" "Uncle Samuel, I can explain everything," Derek began, but his voice was shaky and unconvincing. "The storage unit is just temporary while the renovation work is finished. I was going to bring everything back once the contractors were done." Detective Morrison consulted his notebook. "According to the real estate agent you've been working with, this house is scheduled to go on the market next Monday. That's not very consistent with temporary storage during renovation work." I watched Derek's face cycle through different emotions: panic calculation, desperation, and finally a kind of resigned defiance. He was realizing that his carefully constructed plan was collapsing, but he wasn't ready to admit defeat yet. "You don't understand the full situation," Derek said, turning to address Samuel directly. "Uncle Samuel Cobb has been having serious financial problems. Gambling debts, credit card debt. He's not the successful businessman you think he is. I was trying to protect you from having to deal with that stress." Samuel's expression hardened. "Derek, I may be old, but I'm not stupid. Frank showed me how to check phone records and email logs. I know you've been intercepting calls from Martha and telling her I was too busy to talk. I know you've been cashing her monthly checks and transferring the money to an account I never authorized." Detective Morrison opened a folder and pulled out several documents. "We also have handwriting analysis of the inheritance paperwork. The signature attributed to Cobb was forged and not very skillfully. The angle of the pen strokes and the pressure patterns are completely inconsistent with authentic samples of his writing." Derek's lawyer friend, Mr. Hendricks, had been cooperating with the investigation once he realized the extent of his own liability. Faced with potential disbarment and criminal charges for his role in processing fraudulent documents, he had provided detailed statements about Derek's deception and the shortcuts he had taken during the inheritance transfer. "We also have testimony from the bank manager about the power of attorney documents," Detective Morrison continued. "According to the witness statements, you told your grandfather that he was signing medical directives, when in fact he was giving you broad financial authority that you've been using to steal from his accounts." Samuel reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Frank helped me gather copies of all my financial records for the past year. Every unauthorized transfer, every intercepted check, every lie you told to explain why family members weren't calling or visiting. The evidence was overwhelming, but Derek wasn't ready to surrender yet. He looked around the room desperately, as if searching for an escape route, or a final argument that might save him. "Even if some mistakes were made, everything I did was to help Uncle Samuel," he said. "The house is too much for him to maintain. The financial management was becoming confusing for him. I was trying to simplify his life and make sure he was taken care of properly." "By stealing nearly $30,000 from his accounts?" Detective Morrison asked. "By forging legal documents to steal his grandson's inheritance, by isolating him from his family and lying to everyone about his welfare?" The front door opened, and Aunt Martha walked in, followed by Patricia Robert and 3 other relatives who had driven from different states to be part of the surprise birthday gathering. They stopped short when they saw the packed boxes and the tension in the room. "Samuel!" Martha exclaimed, rushing to hug her brother. "What's going on here, and why is Derek packing up your belongings?" Derek tried one more time to control the narrative. "Aunt Martha, there's been a misunderstanding. Uncle Samuel is making some changes to his living arrangements, and I've been helping him organize his possessions." But Patricia was already looking around the room with growing alarm. "Derek, you told me that Samuel was doing well and staying active with his community activities. Why does this look like he's being forced to move?" Robert examined one of the moving boxes and found his father's Purple Heart from World War II wrapped carelessly in newspaper. "Dad, why are your military decorations being packed away like junk?" The family members began comparing notes, and Derek's web of lies started unraveling publicly. Martha explained that she had been trying to call Samuel for weeks without success. Patricia revealed that Derek had told her Samuel was too busy with social activities to visit. Robert shared that he had been told Samuel was considering a cross-country move to California. Derek told me that Cobb was traveling constantly for business and couldn't maintain regular contact with the family, Martha said, looking confused. But Cobb, you look like you've lost weight. Are you taking care of yourself? I glanced at Samuel, who nodded encouragingly. The time for protecting everyone from painful truths had passed. Aunt Martha, I haven't been traveling for business. I lost my job 8 months ago, and I've been living in my car because Derek stole the house that Grandpa intended to give me. The room fell silent as the family members processed this information. Then Martha's face flushed with anger, and she turned on Derek with the fierce protectiveness of a retired schoolteacher who had spent 40 years dealing with bullies and liars. "Derek Thompson, how dare you!" she said, her voice shaking with fury. "How dare you steal from your own family and lie to all of us? Samuel has been worried sick about everyone thinking we were too busy to visit or call when you were the one keeping us away from him." Detective Morrison stepped forward before the confrontation could escalate further. "Mr. Derek Thompson, based on the evidence we've gathered, I'm placing you under arrest for elder abuse, financial fraud, forgery, and theft. You have the right to remain silent." Derek's legs seemed to give out, and he sat down heavily in one of the chairs he had been preparing to sell. As Detective Morrison read him his rights and applied handcuffs, Derek's facade of respectability finally crumbled completely. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said weakly. "I was just trying to help. Uncle Samuel needed assistance managing his affairs." "By stealing his money and lying to his family?" Patricia asked, her voice filled with disgust. "By forging documents and isolating him from everyone who cares about him?" Samuel walked over to where Derek sat in handcuffs and looked down at him with disappointment rather than anger. "Derek, I trusted you. I welcomed you into my home. I shared family stories with you. I treated you like the grandson I always wanted you to be. And you repaid that trust by stealing from me and lying to everyone we both love." As the police led Derek away, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Justice was finally being served, but the cost had been enormous. Derek's betrayal had shattered the trust and innocence that had held our family together for generations. Even with the legal victory, we would all have to learn how to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by months of deception and manipulation. But there was one more surprise waiting for us. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about Samuel's intentions and the true ownership of the house. After the police car disappeared around the corner with Derek in the back seat, our family stood in the living room surrounded by the chaos of packed boxes and moving equipment, trying to process everything that had happened. The house felt different now, like a crime scene being slowly transformed back into a home. Detective Morrison helped us contact the moving company to halt the transfer of Samuel's belongings, while Attorney Morrison began the legal process of recovering the stolen money and reversing the fraudulent property transfer. The real estate listing would be canceled, the forged inheritance documents would be voided, and Derek would face multiple felony charges that could result in years in prison. But as we started unpacking boxes and returning Samuel's possessions to their proper places, he asked everyone to sit down for a family meeting. There was something he needed to explain. He said something that would help us understand the full scope of what had been happening. "I need to tell all of you something that Derek never knew." Samuel began settling into his favorite reading chair that we had just rescued from one of the moving boxes. The inheritance papers that Derek forged, the documents that supposedly transferred this house to Cobb, those weren't actually legitimate legal instruments. We all stared at him in confusion. If the inheritance papers weren't real, then how had Derek been able to steal the house? Samuel reached into an old wooden box that had been sitting on his bookshelf and pulled out a thick folder of legal documents. 6 months ago, when I first told Derek and Cobb about my plans to update my will, I was actually conducting a test. I wanted to see how each of my grandsons would handle the responsibility of inheritance, how they would treat family property and family relationships. My mouth fell open as the implications of his words sank in. Grandpa, are you saying that the inheritance was never actually finalized? The real inheritance papers are right here, Samuel said, patting the folder. They were prepared by a different law firm, one that Derek didn't know about, and they were never filed with the court system. What Derek stole was essentially a piece of worthless paper that had no legal standing. Detective Morrison smiled, with what looked like professional admiration. Your grandfather has been running a very sophisticated investigation, Cobb. When he started noticing irregularities in his financial accounts and intercepted communications, he contacted me for advice. We've been documenting Derek's activities for weeks, building a case that would hold up in court. Samuel's neighbor had been more than just a retired police officer helping with financial questions. Frank Morrison was a former detective specializing in white-collar crime and elder abuse cases, and he had been conducting a professional-level investigation into Derek's activities. We set up surveillance on Derek's movements, monitored his communications with the real estate agent, and documented every unauthorized transaction he made from my accounts, Samuel explained. We also verified that he had been intercepting family phone calls and mail, creating a pattern of isolation that's typical in elder abuse cases. Martha wiped tears from her eyes, whether from relief or anger, I couldn't tell. Samuel, why didn't you just stop him when you first realized what he was doing? Because we needed him to reveal the full extent of his plan. Detective Morrison answered. Financial crimes like this often involve multiple victims and ongoing schemes. If we had arrested Derek too early, we might never have discovered that he was planning to sell the house and move Samuel across the country. Patricia shook her head in amazement. So Derek committed multiple felonies to steal something that never actually belonged to him in the first place. That's right, Samuel said. And in the process, he revealed his true character. Derek saw an opportunity to exploit what he thought was my declining mental capacity and my grandson's financial vulnerability. He was willing to destroy family relationships, isolate me from people I love, and steal money that was meant to pay for my medical care. Robert leaned forward in his chair. What about Cobb's real inheritance? What were you planning to do with the house? Samuel looked at me with eyes that were bright with affection and pride. Cobb, when I first learned that you were living in your car, rather than asking for help when I discovered that you were protecting my feelings by not telling me about Derek's theft, that told me everything I needed to know about your character. You were willing to suffer in silence rather than cause me pain or worry. He opened the folder and pulled out a set of legal documents that looked much more official and comprehensive than the papers Derek had forged. The house has been yours since the day you turned 25, Cobb. I had the transfer prepared years ago, but I wanted to wait until I was sure you were mature enough to handle the responsibility. I stared at the documents, seeing my name listed as the sole owner of the property on Elm Street. Grandpa, I don't understand. If the house was already mine, why did Derek's scheme work at all? Because Derek never checked the actual property records, Detective Morrison explained. He assumed that your grandfather still owned the house and that the inheritance was something that would happen in the future. He never realized that the legal ownership had already been transferred. Samuel chuckled softly. Derek was so focused on manipulating what he thought were the inheritance documents that he never bothered to verify who actually held the deed to the property. If he had done a simple courthouse search, he would have discovered that I signed the house over to you 3 years ago. The revelation was staggering. Derek had committed multiple felonies, destroyed family relationships, and stolen thousands of dollars to acquire a house that already belonged to me. His elaborate scheme had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the legal situation. So when Derek was living here and making renovations, he was actually living in Cobb's house without permission, Martha asked. Technically, yes, Samuel confirmed. Though Cobb didn't know he owned the property, so he couldn't have given or denied permission. I was waiting for the right moment to surprise him with the news, but Derek's behavior forced me to accelerate my timeline. Over the following weeks, the legal system worked quickly to resolve Derek's crimes and their consequences. He was convicted on multiple felony charges, including elder abuse, financial fraud, forgery, and theft. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in prison and ordered him to pay full restitution for the money he had stolen from Samuel's accounts. The expensive renovations Derek had made to the house actually increased its value significantly, meaning that his attempts to improve the property before selling it had inadvertently benefited the rightful owner. The granite countertops, hardwood floors, and updated appliances became my inheritance rather than Derek's profit. But more importantly, Derek's exposure brought our family back together in ways that hadn't happened since my grandmother's funeral. Martha moved back to town to be closer to Samuel, buying a small house just 3 blocks away. Patricia and Robert began making regular visits, and we instituted monthly family dinners that rotated between different relatives' homes. I converted Samuel's old house into a multi-generational living arrangement, with Samuel taking the downstairs master bedroom and me living in the upstairs rooms. This allowed him to maintain his independence while ensuring that he had daily support and companionship. We installed safety features like grab bars in the bathrooms and a medical alert system, but Samuel remained active and engaged with his community. The experience also led to changes in the legal system's procedures for inheritance transfers and power of attorney documents. Attorney Morrison worked with state legislators to strengthen verification requirements and create better protections against the kind of fraud Derek had perpetrated. Derek's former law firm partner, Mr. Hendricks, lost his license to practice law and faced professional sanctions for his role in processing the fraudulent documents. The firm was required to implement new verification procedures and provide restitution to other clients who might have been affected by similar lapses in professional judgment. For me personally, the experience became a turning point that led to unexpected opportunities. The media attention surrounding Derek's arrest and conviction connected me with advocates for elder abuse prevention, and I was eventually hired by a non-profit organization that helps families navigate financial exploitation cases. My work involves investigating suspicious financial transactions, documenting evidence of elder abuse, and helping families rebuild relationships that have been damaged by financial crimes. It's meaningful work that came directly from my own experience of lost betrayal and ultimately justice. Samuel lived in our shared home for 3 more years, enjoying the daily company of family and the security of knowing he was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about his welfare rather than his assets. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 85, he was surrounded by relatives who had learned to treasure family connections more deeply because of how easily they could be threatened. The house on Elm Street remains in our family, serving as a gathering place for holidays and celebrations, a symbol of how love and loyalty can triumph over greed and deception. The dining room table that Derek had planned to sell now seats 12 people comfortably for Sunday dinners, just as Samuel had always dreamed. Looking back on those months when I was sleeping in my car behind Murphy's Diner, I understand now that the lowest point in my life was actually the beginning of the most important lesson I would ever learn. True family loyalty isn't about protecting people from difficult truths or avoiding confrontation to keep the peace. Sometimes love requires courage, the willingness to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. Derek's betrayal taught our entire family that trust must be earned and verified, that blind faith in someone's good intentions can enable terrible harm. But it also showed us that when family members choose to stand together against injustice, they can overcome even the most sophisticated schemes designed to tear them apart. The experience changed my relationship with material possessions and financial security as well. Having lived without a permanent address, having eaten dollar menu meals for months while sleeping in parking lots, I learned to distinguish between what I need and what I want. The house on Elm Street is valuable, but its real worth comes from the family gatherings it hosts and the memories it holds, rather than its market price. Samuel's test of character, his decision to observe how his grandsons would handle responsibility and family relationships, might seem manipulative or unfair. But I've come to understand that he was protecting his legacy in the only way he knew how, ensuring that his life's work would pass to someone who would honor the values he had tried to instill. The greatest lesson I learned is that family bonds are strengthened, not weakened, when members choose courage over comfort. Protecting Samuel from the truth about Derek's theft might have spared him temporary pain, but it would have enabled ongoing harm that could have destroyed everything he had worked to build. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to fight for them even when they don't know they need protection. Sometimes family loyalty means standing up to the people who would exploit trust and kindness for personal gain. And sometimes justice requires patience, careful planning, and the willingness to endure hardship while you gather the evidence needed to expose the truth. Derek's scheme ultimately failed not because he lacked intelligence or planning skills, but because he fundamentally misunderstood what family really means. He saw relationships as opportunities for exploitation, kindness as weakness to be manipulated, and love as a tool for personal advantage. But real family connections are built on mutual support, honest communication, and shared commitment to each other's well-being. The house on Elm Street stands as a reminder that homes are more than just property or financial assets. They're repositories of memory-gathering places for celebration and comfort foundations for the relationships that give life meaning and purpose. Derek could steal money and forge documents, but he could never truly possess what makes a house a home: the love and loyalty of family members who choose each other every day. That choice, the daily decision to prioritize family relationships over personal advantage, is what separates people like Samuel from people like Derek. It's what turns a building into a home, a group of relatives into a family, and a legal inheritance into a legacy worth preserving for future generations. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and fighting for what's right in your own family? How do you balance protecting your loved ones from painful truths while still standing up for justice? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more stories about family courage and the triumph of love over betrayal. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to fight for what matters most. Thank you for listening, and remember that the strongest families are built not on blind trust, but on the courage to protect each other from those who would do them harm.